Imagine you walk into a 7-Eleven to get some coffee, to get some caffeine to prepare yourself for your late night study session. You see 2 bottles of coffee. One is a more expensive but economically responsible fair trade option, while the other is a slightly cheaper but the same quality and taste, but is manufactured by a company who is rumored to unethically treat their farmers in overseas operations. Which one would you choose? Probably the first one, right? Considering it has a clear ethical difference and benefit while having slight and minor price differences. This trend of incorporating sustainability into consumer decisions is a relatively new one, and it reflects the ongoing trend of change in the business world. It was only in the 1970s that companies recognized that resource limits to growth and serious pollution was a problem, but still, it was still second to corporate profit. It was only in 1987 that the UN recognized the popular concept of sustainable development that meets the needs of the present without compromising that of the future. Currently, a similar trend is known as environmental, social, and governance, or ESG. ESG was first mentioned in a 2006 United Nations report titled, "Who Cares Wins?" ESG refers to factors that assess companies based on their sustainability, and it was required by the UN to be part of the financial evaluation factors that assesses companies. More specifically, ESG criteria includes for the E factor, sustainability, water use, biodiversity, and more, and for the S factor, consumer satisfaction, diversity, human rights, and more. And for the G, governance factor, it includes cybersecurity, board and executive composition, responsible supply chains, and more. ESG is theoretically a balancing tool to balance corporate profits and their social and environmental responsibilities, and it is different from sustainability in the sense that sustainability is a wider set of principles that advocate for the company's social and environmental responsibilities, while ESG is a set of metrics that assess companies based on their risks and opportunities related to sustainability. In its implementation into the real world, ESG has been implemented via 2 ways. ESG ratings is what measures companies based on their quantitative impact of sustainability and its performance on each of the E, S, and G factors. ESG ratings are crucial for ESG investing. So ESG ratings is made by big companies and banks such as Morgan Stanley Capital International, Sustainalytics, S&P Global, and this is used by ESG investing or private asset management firms such as BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, and more. In its implementation into the real world, ESG sees many benefits that have seen a rise in the corporate world. One is that the implementation of ESG results in improved brand image and positive long-term effects, such as more sales and business opportunities. According to McKinsey reports, brands with more than 50% ESG products reported a repeat rate of 32 to 34%, while brands with less than 50% ESG products reported a repeat rate of under 30%. This can be attributed to the green perceived values effect. When consumers see environmental and social value coming out of their consumption of a certain product, they become more willing to buy that product. An excellent example of a company that utilized the green perceived values effect is Patagonia. known for their upscale outdoor clothing, as well as their various sustainable efforts. An example of their campaign was this "Don't Buy This Jacket" campaign, in which they exposed how unsustainable their best-selling fleece jacket was and encouraged customers to buy used Patagonias instead. You can see that some may have thought that this was a self-sabotaging stunt, but on the contrary, it generated much more publicity for the brand and actually generated 30% growth in revenue through the green perceived lives effect. This goes to show that by following ESG practices, companies can show to investors and customers that the previously seen clashing values of corporate benefits and responsibilities can not only go together, but can be mutually beneficial. Secondly, the modern world is going woke, and there are repercussions for companies who fall behind this trend. An infamous example is Namyang Dairy Industries in Korea. According to the Financial Supervisory Service, their abhorrent corporate decisions of penalizing working mothers for using maternity leaves, as well as forcing retailers to buy their products in order to fill their quotas, and its eventual disclosure to the media, led to its spiraling decline in revenue and company profits of 868 million won over the course of 9 years, since it's the first reports of its controversy. A better work environment that ensues by focusing on the G factor of ESG can result in tangible results for a company by fostering productivity. According to a model proposed by Seoul National University Business School, respect of the individual or the employee at the very start results in employees' positive attitudes as well as voluntary learning behaviors, and results in a positive change throughout the firm. In reality, however, according to a Harvard Business Review survey, over half of employees across America felt disrespected by their superiors, which led to 80% of such employees spending significant time ruminating on these behaviors, while 48% of employees deliberately reduced their efforts out of disobedience and led to a almost $90 million lost in value for median S&P 500 companies. Using ESG, however, and focusing on the G factor can foster better work environments and help capture the lost $90 million. So, with these numerous benefits in mind, is ESG the best solution to balance corporate profits and its responsibilities? No, not even close. In its implementation into the real world, ESG has seen many limitations that hinder this ideal situation from happening. The biggest problem is that there is an absence of an ESG standard that is used to make ESG ratings. First, I want to ask you a question of the ESG ratings of these two companies. One is Tesla, as you all know, a well-known electric car company, while the other is BP, British Petroleum, a well-known multinational oil and gas company, otherwise known for their Deepwater Horizon oil spill, in which they spilled 210 million of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. Considering all the E, S, and G factors, which company do you think has a higher ESG rating?
Tesla.
Surprisingly, the answer is no. They actually have the same high rating of A. You could say this was a trick question, since ESG ratings are not evaluated by comparing between industries, across industries, but rather within a single certain industry. This is only one of the many misleading factors that mislead investors into thinking companies like BP have a higher ESG positive impact on their environment and society. Moreover, according to the OECD, ESG rating agencies are untransparent in their disclosure of how their ratings are calculated. For example, this is MSCI, Morgan Stanley Capital International, a leading ESG rating agency's metric of how they calculate their ratings. This includes voluntary information given up by their firms to the public, in which methods to test for its data for its accuracy are not present, which led to 70% of firm executives being unsure of even their own data. It also includes subjective social factors that are difficult to assess in its actual impact, as well as the inclusion of a plethora of third-party sources that are difficult to assess in its authenticity, as well as the inclusion of even the press, not even checked for their media biases, to be included in this ESG metrics. This ultimately resulted in almost 2/3 of firm executives being unprepared to meet ESG goals and disclosure requirements. Is that there are just way too many rating agencies, and therefore divergent ratings of the same company. For example, the following that I will show you are the ESG ratings given to the company Amazon by various rating agencies. For example, Sustainalytics gave them a rating of high risk, while S&P Global gave them a rating of medium risk, while MSCI gave them a rating of BBB, or average. SDP Disclosure, however, gave them a rating of F. Although these ratings, this disagreement in ratings, is fundamentally not a bad thing, the confusion it causes among investors is a significant problem. The problem with these unstandardized ratings is that it is being taken advantage of. Such unstandardized ratings allow for selected, undeserving companies to exploit them and therefore gain high ratings and access to capital through funds, while actual deserving companies with tangible impact are excluded. Regardless of investors being aware of these limitations of ESG, many institutionalized investors, such as investors inside private asset management companies and pension funds, as well as some retail investors, have invested heavily into these ESG funds. And therefore, over the recent years, ESG has seen tremendous growth. According to a Wall Street Journal analysis, ESG funds average returns outpaced that of the fund's broader categories or non-ESG funds by 75%, while the ESG assets under management is expected to reach $33.9 trillion in 2026. The catch is, however, this asset of $33.9 trillion are only available to companies who are included within these ESG funds, and to get into and maintain their spots within these ESG funds, companies are increasingly capitalizing on these unstandardized ratings and also utilizing falsely advertised funds. This act is known as greenwashing, or in definition, the act of providing the investors or public with misleading or outright false information about the environmental impact of a company's products and operations. In ESG's context, this means even though companies may seem like they're bringing good, significant environmental and social impact, they're actually just trying to satisfy their institutionalized investors in order to gain more capital. This leads us to what we can do to address this current flawed system of ESG, and it is to practice smart, conscious consumerism. It is the best shot that we, as mere investors, mere retail investors and customers can bring change to this flawed ESG system. Smart Conscious Consumerism is a very simple way of a three-step method of making informed decisions to invest and consume for the good of the world while protecting your own benefits. The first step is to establish your own set of firm, consumer, or investor values. This can include buying products with the most utility and for the least amount of money, while considering some ESG factors. Or it could be refraining buying from certain companies due to their scandals. These beliefs will allow investors and consumers to invest in companies that align with their own missions. For example, you might buy the Apple Watch over the Samsung Watch because not only it aligns well with other Apple products, it actually is the first product in Apple's product line to reach net zero. The second step is to research. Through just 5 minutes of research, you can be aware of the various environmental and social issues that surround the company that you're about to invest and consume products in. And while weeding out these greenwashing companies and addressing the limitations of ESG. This will serve as the backbone of your decision to buy and consume for the good of the world. While researching, you should also be aware of greenwashing advertising, in which companies falsely promote and exaggerate their sustainability benefits. To watch out for these claims and filter them, I urge you to follow and be aware of these common greenwashing practices by firms, as research suggests in the University of Colorado. You should be filtering these claims with no evidence, like Shell's biodiversity missions, in which they give no quantitative evidence in their sustainability report to suggest so, as well as green suggesting images that give out a green impression without any justification. Like if you look at this Shell logo, for example, you can see nowhere in its logo its actual primary mission of extracting oil and gas. You should also be aware and filter out these irrelevant claims that only emphasize a single green aspect of companies and take out their actual entire operations, as well as being aware that companies can lie with numbers. Lastly, presuming you are considering using ESG to invest wisely into companies that have tangible impact for the environment and society, I urge you to watch out for these perils of ESG that I deduced in my research process of this 1 year. And to accurately gauge a company's impact on the world through ESG ratings, we should always realize that companies' ESG ratings are not dictated by a single ESG factor. For example, ExxonMobil, a well-known oil and gas company, even though they were raised as a lagging factor by MSCI for their biodiversity and land use, their mediocre ratings in toxic emissions and waste, gender equality, community values, and all that, that eventually led to their rating being BBB, or average. You should also be aware that ESG ratings are evaluated not for their actual environmental and social impact on the world, but rather its level of perceived regulatory risk. This means that they are evaluated for how likely they are to be punished and penalized by governments in their own operations. This means companies will tend to greenwash their actions by doing the bare minimum to pass government regulations and not be subject to public scrutiny, all the while increasing their ESG ratings through these bare minimum. You should also realize that these ESG funds are hugely profitable for private asset management companies, and you may potentially be paying more for less impact by choosing to invest with ESG funds. According to a Harvard study by Malcolm Baker, he says that you are paying more for ESG funds as a charge and expense ratio, a premium of 5.8% basis points higher than non-ESG funds, while they bring less impact because ESG funds on average have 65% of their assets in the same exact holdings as non-ESG funds, meaning only 35% of their assets goes into ESG specific assets or stocks. Considering these factors, you might actually want to invest in companies that you have researched yourself and take through these practices rather than blindly investing through greenwashing, blindly investing into ESG funds. Through these 3 steps of establishing firm values, researching, and realizing these perils of ESG, you'll be able to act as the invisible hand of economics by being informed and wise investors or consumers, while not being tricked by greenwashing and the limitations of ESG ratings. This way, in the long term, companies who prioritize institutionalized investors over their actual customers by doing superficial operations will be selected against, as decreased profitability will lead to decreased institutionalized investors for these companies. While companies that have actual tangible impact towards the environment and society, such as Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, and many more companies, will receive funding to continue their sustainable operations. Through Smart Conscious Consumerism, we will hopefully take the financial power back from the power that was given to asset managers and greenwashing firms and allow individuals to amplify their own beliefs by investing in companies that both tell and do and not just tell. I would like to end with a quote by a Professor Patatsukas at the Haas Business School. Consumers and investors can be a force for change. It's about the time to ensure that the voices of everyday investors are being heard. Thank you.